In our last video, we dove into Jane Austen's most celebrated novel, Pride and Prejudice, and explored how its famous adaptations have shaped the way we see Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, whether it's the faithful 6-hour 1995 BBC miniseries or the visually stunning 2005 film. Now, Netflix has decided to stir the pot once again with the announcement of a brand new Pride and Prejudice adaptation, complete with a fresh cast. The internet is already buzzing with speculation, some hopeful, others skeptical. After all, when it comes to Austen, one wrong step can divide fans for years. But here's the thing, before we look forward, it's worth looking back. Because this isn't Netflix's first attempt at reimagining Austen. Just a short while ago, they released Persuasion, and what was supposed to be a bold, modern take on one of Austen's most delicate stories turned into one of the most debated adaptations in recent memory. So today, let's revisit Persuasion and break down why, for so many Austen fans, it was such a painful hit and miss. If we start from the very beginning, then our first question should be, why does Hollywood keep ruining Jane Austen's most delicate characters? It feels like every time we get a new adaptation of her work, the same question pops up. Do modern filmmakers actually understand what makes Austen timeless? Or are they so desperate to spice things up that they strip away everything that made her stories resonate in the first place? Jane Austen wrote about quiet strength, about longing so intense it never needed to be spoken, and about characters whose emotions lived in subtle gestures, silences, and unspoken words. But if you look at Netflix's 2022 version of Persuasion, you'd think Austen's heroine was just another quirky, sarcastic, relatable girl plucked straight out of a millennial rom-com. And that's exactly where the controversy begins. For those who haven't read it, Persuasion is one of Austen's most underrated masterpieces. Unlike the fiery clashes of Pride and Prejudice or the matchmaking chaos of Emma, Persuasion tells a quieter, more mature love story. It's about Elliot, a young woman who once turned down the love of her life, Captain Wentworth, because her family thought he wasn't good enough. Years later, the two meet again, older, wiser, and still carrying the weight of unspoken feelings. It's not a story of bold declarations or dramatic proposals. It's a story of restraint, of longing, of aching silences that say more than words ever could. Fans love it precisely because it captures something real, the quiet pain of regret, and the courage it takes to finally speak up. So when Netflix announced a new adaptation, fans were divided. On one hand, there was excitement. This could finally be Persuasion's moment to shine. But on the other hand, there was fear. Because modern Hollywood has a habit of underestimating Austen's quiet genius. And unfortunately, those fears turned out to be justified. From the very first trailer, alarm bells went off. Instead of the subtle elegance fans expected, the movie came across as cheeky and quirky, like Austen by way of TikTok humor. And Elliot, once the shy and contemplative observer of others, was now cracking sarcastic jokes to the camera, breaking the fourth wall, and blurting out lines that felt more suited to Fleabag than a Regency drama. The language? Filled with anachronisms. Characters casually tossed around words like playlist and exes, shattering any illusion of being in Austen's world. Costumes? At times they looked less like early 19th century attire and more like someone raided the clearance rack at Zara. And while some viewers enjoyed the playful modernization, many Austen fans felt betrayed. It wasn't just a matter of historical inaccuracy. It was the sense that the filmmakers didn't trust Austen's original story to be engaging enough on its own. Instead, they tried to turn Persuasion into something it was never meant to be, a quirky romantic comedy with a vintage backdrop. But the real damage wasn't in the set design or the slang. It was in the characters themselves, especially Elliot. At the heart of Persuasion is Elliot, one of Jane Austen's most nuanced heroines. She's not dazzling like Elizabeth Bennet, or witty and mischievous like Emma Woodhouse, and is quiet, reserved, and deeply observant. When the story begins, she's weighed down by years of regret, haunted by the choice to give up Captain Wentworth and convinced she's past her prime. In the book, and isn't a bold, outspoken character. She doesn't take center stage at every moment. Instead, she listens, she reflects, and she often sacrifices her own happiness for the comfort of others. Some call her passive, but that's exactly what makes her arc so powerful. Over the course of the novel, Anne learns to value her own voice. She finds the courage to speak up, to stand her ground, and ultimately, to follow her heart. It's a transformation that feels earned and deeply human, one of the reasons so many readers connect with her. But in Netflix's version, Anne isn't shy, thoughtful, or self-sacrificing. Instead, she's reimagined as a clumsy, wine-drinking, sarcastic heroine who cracks jokes to the audience like she's hosting a Regency stand-up routine. She's goofy, self-aware, and constantly winking at the camera. In short, she's been turned into the stereotypical, not like other girls character. Sure, she has a pet rabbit, blurts out awkward speeches at the dinner table, and makes cheeky comments, but all of this strips away the gentle strength that defined Austen's Anne. Instead of watching a woman quietly wrestle with her regrets and slowly grow into herself, we're handed a protagonist who already acts confident and self-assured from the very beginning. And if the heroine already knows her worth, then where does her story have to go? This is the fundamental problem. By making Anne quirky and outspoken, the film erased her journey of self-discovery. It took away the vulnerability, the softness, and the relatable insecurities that made her so beloved in the first place. And when you flatten Anne into a modern archetype, the delicate tension that drives Persuasion simply disappears. But Anne wasn't the only casualty of this adaptation. Captain Wentworth, her great love, also lost what made him unforgettable. If Elliot is the quiet heart of Persuasion, then Captain Frederick Wentworth is the steady pulse that makes it beat. In Austen's novel, Wentworth is a man of action, confident, determined, and deeply wounded by Anne's rejection years earlier. What makes his character so compelling isn't fiery dialogue or bold gestures, but the restraint he shows. When he re-enters Anne's world, he doesn't storm in with bitterness or passion. Instead, he's painfully polite, even distant. His courtesy is almost unbearable because it's so obvious that behind every calm word lies the memory of heartbreak. For readers, this silence is excruciating in the best way. You can feel the tension in every glance, every small moment of avoidance. The beauty of Austen's writing is that the emotions are all beneath the surface. You feel the ache precisely because so little is said aloud. Now compare that to Netflix's Wentworth. Instead of quiet dignity, we get snarky banter, salty remarks, and a tone that feels more like an annoyed ex-boyfriend than a man guarding a broken heart. Rather than creating suspense through subtle distance, the movie throws Anne Wentworth into awkward, bickering conversations almost immediately. Instead of tension building gradually, it gets deflated from the start. This shift completely undermines one of the most powerful aspects of Persuasion, the long, aching wait. In the book, you don't know how Wentworth feels until much later, and every interaction leaves you guessing. In the movie, his sarcasm and obvious bitterness make it clear he's not over, and while that might sound dramatic, it actually robs the story of its slow-burning intensity. Worse still, the chemistry feels off. In Austen's version, the unspoken bond between Anne and Wentworth is magnetic precisely because no one else notices it. It's their secret, their shared history, their unspoken longing. But in the film, everyone around them seems to know they're still hung up on each other. It's like being stuck in a room where all your friends keep nudging you about your ex. Subtle romance?
Gone.
Awkward secondhand embarrassment? Everywhere. By turning Wentworth into a sharp-tongued, jealous figure, the adaptation strips away his quiet nobility. Instead of a restrained man whose silence carries unbearable weight, he becomes just another rom-com lead with wounded pride. And without Wentworth's carefully controlled composure, the central romance loses the very tension that makes it unforgettable. But the cracks don't stop with the two leads. The supporting cast, usually Austen's secret weapon, also got reshaped in ways that tilted the entire story off balance. Jane Austen's brilliance often shines brightest in her side characters. They add humor, contrast, and texture to her stories, making the main romance feel more grounded and believable. In Persuasion, the Musgroves, Lady Russell, and Mr. Elliot all play important roles in shaping Anne's journey. But once again, Netflix's version couldn't resist tampering with them, and the ripple effects were huge. Take the Musgrove sisters, Louisa and Henrietta. In the book, they're young, lively, and a bit naive, focused on fun, flirtation, and finding husbands. Their energy stands in stark contrast to Anne's quiet maturity. They're not her besties, and they certainly don't sit around giving her mature relationship advice. But in the movie, they're suddenly portrayed as surprisingly responsible, almost wise beyond their years. At one point, Louisa even checks in with, and before pursuing Captain Wentworth, as if she's her therapist. That shift may sound harmless, but it completely rewrites the dynamic. Instead of highlighting Anne's maturity by contrasting it with the sisters' youth, the movie flattens them into sidekicks, removing one of the key social tensions of the novel. Then there's Mr. Elliot, Anne's scheming cousin. In Austen's story, he's charming at first, but eventually revealed to be manipulative and self-serving. His role is crucial because it tests Anne's judgment. When she discovers his true motives, her rejection of him shows how far she's come in valuing her own instincts. But Netflix's Mr. Elliot? He's more of a cheeky flirt with a touch of roguish honesty. Instead of feeling like a genuine threat to Anne's future, he becomes almost likable. Their dynamic even hints at romantic tension, which completely blurs the moral clarity of Austen's original. And then there's Mary Musgrove, Anne's self-absorbed sister. Surprisingly, she's one of the few characters who survived the adaptation mostly intact. Whiny, dramatic, and hilariously self-centered. But even her presence isn't enough to balance out how softened or altered the rest of the cast became. The result? A supporting cast that feels less like a mirror reflecting Anne's struggles and more like a quirky ensemble in a modern rom-com. It strips away the social realism Austen wove into her stories, the idea that people, with all their flaws, can shape and limit your choices. But the biggest misstep wasn't just in how these characters were rewritten. It was in how everyone suddenly seemed to be in on and Wentworth's love story. And that single choice shattered the quiet magic of Persuasion. One of the most beautiful aspects of Persuasion is its intimacy. And Wentworth's love story is a private, unspoken thing that exists almost entirely between the two of them. Nobody else really knows the depth of what happened in their past, and that secrecy is what makes the tension so magnetic. Every shared glance, every avoided conversation, feels like a secret the reader is privileged to witness. In Austen's novel, only a handful of people are aware of Anne's broken engagement, and most choose to ignore it. Her family, absorbed in their own vanity, brushes it aside. Lady Russell, who once persuaded Anne to reject Wentworth, keeps it close but never parades it around. To the rest of the world, and Wentworth's connection is invisible. And that's exactly why their longing feels so raw. It's a private storm raging beneath the surface, unnoticed by anyone else. But in Netflix's adaptation, subtlety is thrown out the window. Suddenly, it feels like everyone is a shipper. Louisa openly encourages Anne to go after Wentworth. Mary makes cheeky comments about their history. Even Captain Harville gets in on it, nudging Anne like some Regency-era wingman. Instead of two people suffering silently while the world carries on obliviously, we get a parade of side characters winking and nudging, as if they're all rooting for the reunion. And here's the problem. When everyone knows about Anne and Wentworth's past, the tension dies. There's no more secrecy, no more suppressed emotion. It turns what should be a story about longing and restraint into something painfully on the nose. Instead of the reader, or in this case, the viewer, feeling special for noticing the hidden undercurrents, the movie just spells it out. It's the difference between a love story that simmers and one that shouts. Austen gave us the quiet ache of two people circling each other, each terrified to admit what they feel. Netflix gave us awkward dinner table comments and friends playing matchmaker. And the result? The mood collapses. The aching restraint that makes Persuasion unforgettable is replaced by cringe-worthy second-hand embarrassment. But this wasn't the only way the film dismantled Austen's carefully crafted subtlety. When it came to the historical details, the setting, the costumes, the culture of the time, the movie leaned even harder into modern sensibilities, often at the expense of realism. If there's one thing fans of period dramas crave, it's immersion. We want to feel transported, drawn into the candlelit ballrooms, the whispered conversations, the strict codes of behavior that made every glance and gesture carry so much weight. That's why Austen adaptations are so beloved. They let us step into a world where love had to navigate rigid social rules and devastating consequences. But in Netflix's Persuasion, the historical setting often felt less like a lived-in world and more like a flimsy backdrop for a modern rom-com. Let's start with the costumes. In Austen's time, clothing wasn't just fashion. It was status, culture, identity. In Persuasion, and should appear understated, even overlooked, blending into the background while her more glamorous family members shine. But in Netflix's adaptation, and often looks like she stepped out of a 2022 Pinterest board. Loose hair at the beach, plain dresses that look more like maxi skirts and blouses, and even moments that felt like they could have been shot for a contemporary rom-com. Instead of grounding the story in history, the costumes yanked viewers out of it. And when a period drama looks modern, the whole illusion falls apart. Then there's the dancing. Historical dances in Austen's time were already brimming with tension. When physical touch was so restricted, even the brush of a hand could feel electric. That's why the dance scenes in adaptations like Joe Wright's Pride and Prejudice are legendary. They capture how restraint can be even more thrilling than passion. But Netflix didn't trust that. Instead, they spiced up the dances, making them more physical and modern, as if audiences couldn't handle the slow-burn intimacy of a simple turn and a glance. In trying to make it hotter, they made it emptier. And don't even get me started on Lady Russell's European escapades. In the film, she's portrayed as a woman who's had lovers abroad, a worldly adventurer dabbling in romance. Sounds bold, right? Except in the early 19th century, that would have been social suicide. A single misstep could ruin a woman's entire reputation, cut her off from society, and condemn her to a life of isolation. For Lady Russell, a woman cautious enough to persuade and to reject Wentworth because of financial instability, such behavior would have been unthinkable. It's not just historically inaccurate, it's out of character. And then there's the tone. By layering modern jokes, slang, and casual attitudes onto a world where every choice carried enormous consequences, the film stripped away the very stakes that make Austen's work so powerful. It misunderstood the culture of restraint that made every whisper, every sacrifice, and every silence matter. But if all of this wasn't enough to pull viewers out of the story, the adaptation had one more surprise, an infamous scene so bizarre, it became the rotten cherry on top of this already confused cake. Just when you thought Netflix's Persuasion couldn't get any stranger, the movie throws in one last curveball, the infamous octopus dream sequence. Yes, you heard that right. Out of nowhere and imagines or dreams of an octopus. It's supposed to be funny, a quirky little flourish to show off the film's offbeat sense of humor. But instead, it lands like a rotten cherry on top of an already collapsing cake. Why is it such a problem? Because it sums up everything wrong with the adaptation. Austen's Persuasion is a story about restraint, quiet longing, and the silent dignity of two people finding their way back to each other. It's not surreal, it's not quirky, and it's certainly not absurd. Dropping in a random octopus dream doesn't just clash with the tone, it trivializes the entire story. It's like the filmmakers didn't trust the material to hold an audience's attention, so they added gimmicks. But this wasn't the only moment of absurdity. The movie is filled with scenes that feel out of place, and blurting out snarky lines that no woman of her time would say, anachronistic girl boss, moments that flatten her complexity, and bizarre tonal shifts that swing from slapstick to melodrama. Instead of enhancing Austen's delicate narrative, these additions turned it into something unrecognizable. What makes the octopus scene stand out, though, is how it crystallizes the disconnect between the filmmakers and Austen's world. They thought they were making a modern, edgy, meme-worthy period drama. But in doing so, They lost sight of what makes Persuasion timeless: the unspoken, the subtle, the quiet heartbreak of second chances. Costumes that look modern, dances stripped of tension, characters rewritten into cliches, and finally, an octopus. It's as if the film went out of its way to avoid giving viewers the very thing they came for: Austen's aching, understated romance. And that's the real tragedy. Because beneath all the missteps, there's still a brilliant novel waiting for its faithful adaptation, a story that doesn't need gimmicks or quirkiness to shine. At the end of the day, Netflix's Persuasion wasn't just a bad adaptation, it was a missed opportunity. Instead of trusting Austen's quiet brilliance, the film tried to modernize her story into something quirky and meme-worthy. The result was a version of an Elliot that felt unrecognizable, a Captain Wentworth stripped of his restrained dignity, and a love story that lost its most essential ingredient: silence. The real tragedy isn't just that the movie failed. It's that it showed Hollywood's ongoing discomfort with gentle characters. In a world where loud personalities dominate the screen, Austen's softer, more introspective heroes and heroines are treated as boring, unless they're spiced up with sarcasm, alcohol, or modern slang. But here's the truth: there's nothing boring about quiet resilience. There's nothing dull about longing that builds over years of silence. And there's certainly nothing outdated about a story that reminds us of the courage it takes to love again. And now, Netflix is preparing its next Austen venture, a brand new adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. On paper, that sounds exciting. After all, it's Austen's most beloved novel. But after what we saw with Persuasion, fans have every reason to be nervous. Will Elizabeth Bennet be turned into another relatable girl boss with TikTok slang? Will Darcy's brooding restraint be swapped for clumsy banter? If and Elliot wasn't safe from being flattened into a quirky stereotype, what hope is there for Lizzie and Darcy, the crown jewels of Austen's legacy? That's why this matters. Because Austen doesn't need to be modernized to be relevant. Her stories already speak to timeless truths about love, pride, regret, vulnerability, and the power of second chances. When filmmakers strip away the subtlety, they strip away the very soul of her work. And if Netflix treats Pride and Prejudice the way it treated Persuasion, it won't just be a disappointing adaptation, it'll be a betrayal of one of the greatest romances ever written. So here's the question: will Hollywood finally learn to trust Austen's quiet genius? Or are we doomed to keep watching her gentle characters turned into caricatures? Because until they get it right, we'll still be waiting for that faithful adaptation, the one that understands Austen never needed an octopus or a wink at the camera to capture our hearts. And that's a wrap. Drop your comments below. What do you think of Netflix's Persuasion and its new attempt on Pride and Prejudice? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.